Good evening. I'm going to talk about my dissertation, specifically how I arrived at my framework on consonances and dissonances of teachers' beliefs and practices. Let me give you a background first. The Department of Education spearheaded a major educational reform known as K to 12, which proposes the constructivist perspective of learning, whose major tenet is that the learner is a constructor of knowledge and active maker of meaning. For teaching reform to be effective, it would require changes in teachers' deeply held beliefs about classroom teaching. According to Giroux, one reason why educational reforms in the past have not succeeded is that the teachers have been simply objects of educational reforms that reduce them to the status of high level technicians, carrying out dictates and objectives decided by experts far removed from the everyday realities of classroom life. Such teacher development processes tend to develop teachers who view teaching as involving the strict execution of prescribed actions and who have low levels of understanding about their practice. It can be assumed that teachers are more likely to implement the reforms if their beliefs are supportive of the proposed changes in the curriculum. However, teacher beliefs may also be solid, resistant to reform, and may work as barriers to changes in the teaching practices. Although many studies have supported that there is an interrelation between beliefs and actions, some studies showed that there is a dissonant relationship between teachers' beliefs and their actual practice. When beliefs are not consonant to practice, there is a need to find out the constraints that hinder translation of belief to practice in order to be able to address as implication the areas that cause difficulties. Mapping the relationship of high school teachers, pedagogical beliefs, and practices will establish the framework that teachers are using in the classroom experience that they provide to their students. This will allow understanding teachers' beliefs and theories about their work in order to make explicit and visible the frames of reference through which the individual teachers perceive and process information. Because these beliefs or frames of reference are unstated, the teachers may not be aware of the possible conflict between their underlying beliefs and philosophical underpinnings of proposed changes to their practices. I deemed that 3 years after the implementation of the K 12 curriculum at the time I did my research, 2017, it was very important to have a baseline information on the pedagogical beliefs and practices of the selected public high school teachers. The questions that I aimed to answer were the following. What are the beliefs of the public school teachers about learners, classroom teaching, and assessment of learning outcomes? How are the teachers' pedagogical beliefs translated to practice? What are the factors that influence translation or non translation of beliefs to practice? And what are the points of consonance and dissonance between the teacher's beliefs and practices vis a vis K 12 program context? The main framework that this study used in analyzing the teacher beliefs and practices was Clark Peterson's cognitive model of teachers' thought and action, which shows that teachers' thought and processes and practices influence one another. The teacher's thought processes include teachers' planning, interactive thoughts and decisions, theories, and beliefs. This research focused on the third category of teachers' thought processes and theories and beliefs, which affects the first two categories, the teacher's planning and interactive thoughts and decisions. The teacher's practices on the left side include the teacher's and students' classroom behavior and student achievement. Clark and Peterson's model takes into account the constraints and opportunities. Constraints include the physical setting or the external influences of the curriculum, the administration, and the community. According to Clark and Peterson, the teachers are constrained when they are given fewer opportunities to have flexibility in their planning when the curriculum decisions have already been made by the school or by the district on when they have fewer opportunities or responsibility in the decision making process. Using Clark and Peterson's cognitive model of teacher's thought and action as base, I created this visual representation of the theoretical framework of my study. I used several theories to guide me in analyzing the data that I gathered. In this study, the pedagogical beliefs include beliefs about the learners, how they learn, and how learning is measured. I assume that teacher beliefs act as filters through which instructional judgments and decisions are made. Literature on pedagogical beliefs about students centers on the teacher expectation of students, which has been found to significantly affect the students' current performance due to the learning opportunities and level of standards provided by the teachers. Dweck proposed that teachers have two sets of beliefs about students' intelligence. The fixed mindset tends to be connected to stereotyping of students, while the growth mindset promotes classrooms that are free of bias. The two ends of the continuum of beliefs on the nature of teaching and learning include direct transmission beliefs and constructivist view of education. Yuba and Fried elaborated that the direct transmission beliefs with teacher-centered paradigm uses assessment to monitor learning, while the constructivist beliefs with learner-centered paradigm uses assessment to promote and diagnose learning. The assessment tools are more popularly known as traditional and authentic assessment. In the direct transmission beliefs, which have behaviorist underpinnings, the teacher is the center of the learning process, views the student as passive, conveys information to them, and uses summative traditional assessment. In constructivist beliefs, the student is the center of the learning process and is viewed as active and thus develops higher order thinking skills. This kind of assessment is emphasized in constructivist beliefs. The kind of assessment emphasized in constructivist beliefs is formative, authentic assessment. The same set of theories were used in analyzing the teacher practices. The cognitive dissonance theory by Festinger states that an individual experiences a mental discomfort or psychological stress which comes from holding two or more conflicting cognitions, which may be the beliefs, attitudes, and behavior. Awareness or recognition of the inconsistency will cause dissonance and will motivate an individual to resolve the dissonance. A relevant concept that emerged from the research on cognitive dissonance is the conception of the forced compliance behavior. Forced compliance occurs when an individual performs an action that is inconsistent with the individual beliefs. The dissonance is reduced by reevaluating his or her attitude towards what he or she has done. According to Delaney, in the context of education, teachers feel dissonance when teachers try to make sense of and implement the competing conceptions of what is best for students. For Delaney, dissonance can serve as an opportunity to support teacher professional development, while unsupported dissonance can undermine the ability and agency of teachers to make decisions about how to approach classroom teaching in ways that reflect both their professional knowledge and their knowledge of what their students need. My study used purposive sampling to increase the range of data and maximize possibilities of uncovering multiple realities. I chose three Quezon City public junior high schools listed under different levels of performance in the National Achievement Test: high performing, average performing, and low performing. Quezon City was chosen because, according to the National Statistics Office, Quezon City was the most populous city in the Philippines with 2.8 million residents. Public schools were chosen because three-fourths of the population were enrolled in the city's public schools, and junior high school level was chosen because public high school students had significantly lower national achievement scores than elementary students for the past 5 years. I aimed at being able to conduct in-depth interviews with a total of at least 48 teachers, but I was able to interview only 45 teachers because of difficulty in setting time with three teachers who were designated by the head teachers for the interview. I requested the principal of each school to recommend one teacher per level from grade 7 to 10 in Araling Panlipunan, Social Studies, English, Math, and Science. Variety of years of teaching experience was asked for to gain a variability of perspectives. The research focused on Araling Panlipunan, English, Math, and Science because these subjects had been the ones included in the National Achievement Test for the past years. Out of the 45 teachers I analyzed, the lesson plan, I also analyzed the lesson plans and observed the classes of 16 teachers. It was difficult to make the teachers agree to being observed because they thought that they had this negative feeling when being observed because they thought that they would always be evaluated. Okay? And they felt that they had to prepare for the observation. So the table shows how I gathered and analyzed data, but I will not spend much time on it because I will focus on how I develop my framework. Before I was able to come up with the final framework at the end of presentation of findings for research questions, I wrote a synthesis and designed a visual representation of that synthesis. Thus, you will see sub-frameworks of the final frameworks. Now, before I present the final framework, I will give you a visual representation of the synthesis. This figure shows the synthesis of the teacher's beliefs about learners, which presents a continuum from a bias to a bias-free belief about the learner characteristics. If you're familiar with Dweck's theory, this continuum is a refined continuum between fixed and growth mindset. Most teachers in the study had biased beliefs about learners. Both the negative and positive teacher beliefs about the learners tended to manifest fixed mindset because the student characteristics were attributed to innate traits of the students. Since the student qualities were believed to be innate, the teachers expected them to stay fixed, and this is the problem with the negative and positive bias that the teachers held. The neutral beliefs about the learners were bias free and focused on the diversity of the learners. Such belief embodies growth mindset and interventionist beliefs because the teacher concentrated on the learning styles and other specific needs of the learners and thought of appropriate teaching approaches accordingly. As Melody Rosenfeld and Sherman Rosenfeld posited, teachers with interventionist beliefs about students believe that they can intervene to make a difference in the students' learning difficulties because they act on the belief and all students can learn in the belief that all students can learn and meet the needs of diverse learners. The teachers had different views about teaching. Some viewed it just an occupation as just an occupation, some as mission and vocation, and the rest as passion, dedication, and commitment. Using the organismic integration theory by Deci and Ryan, the motivation of the teachers was identified in order to establish the hierarchy of teaching views, aside from considering the amount of involvement the teachers believed to be needed in teaching. This figure summarizes the teacher's beliefs about teaching and learning. It shows that the teacher's beliefs about the classroom teaching were anchored on the classroom teaching approaches, this one, the classroom management and supplementary approaches. Here I wrote behaviorist because most of the teachers had behaviorist classroom management. The teaching approaches were characterized by the principle of behaviorism or constructivism, or maybe simply a focus on group activities as endorsed by the K to 12 curriculum. Some teachers tended to think that learner could be enhanced by practicing a behavior style of classroom management. Still, other believes that classroom teaching could be improved by involving the parents in the education of their children through peer support and teachers' personal guidance. The results indicated that the teachers were willing to comply with the K 12 initiatives, but many still held behaviorist beliefs. This finding corroborated with those of von Oppel and Aldrich and Cleve studies where the teachers tended to revert to traditional practices in spite of ongoing educational reform involving the implementation of constructivist approaches. Despite the K 12's emphasis on performance based assessment, the teachers tended to believe that the best indicator for learning were through quizzes or chapter tests, recitation, and the written output from modules. Very few believe that learning could be assessed through performance and reflective journal. The teachers were inclined to favor traditional assessment over alternative assessment in determining learning outcomes. This may be due to influence of long time practice in traditional assessment. This table shows the overview of the observed teachers' pedagogical beliefs and practices. Most of the teachers were able to translate their beliefs to practices, and only five had dissonant beliefs and practices. A closer look the upper part of the previous table shows the consonant translation of teachers' beliefs about classroom teaching into practice. The pseudonyms that start with E are actually English teachers, S, science teachers, A, araling panlipunan teachers, and M, math teachers for easy reference. The discussion of this part is the longest one in my dissertation, but I will not discuss this in detail anymore. This figure visually summarizes the findings among the teachers who were able to translate their belief that the best teaching approach was a combination of group activity and lecture. This combination of group activities endorsed by K to 12 and may be behaviorist or teacher centered or constructivist or learner centered depending on how it was implemented. Those who were those who were mali yung hinighlight ko. Those who were teacher-centered tapped lower orders thinking skills in the classroom, focusing more on grammar or definition of scientific concepts. Those who were learner-centered tapped higher order thinking skills. They had good questioning skills and were evidently experts in the subjects that they were handling. Actually, teachers Ellen and Sarah were master teachers. Although the teachers listed in the previous slide had consonant beliefs and practices, especially the ones utilizing the behaviorist approach, had conceptual dissonances in learner-centered principles. Conceptual dissonance is a label I created to refer to dissonances between the teacher's understanding of the teaching learning principle and the true meaning of the principle. What they labeled as meaningful learning was not really meaningful because they implemented rote learning. They thought that facilitating meant simply not lecturing and letting the students answer the modules, but actually facilitating is more than that. Traditional groups were formed with around 10 members in the group but they believe that they were forming collaborative grouping. Teachers and principals view were also clashing on what mass promotion really meant. The teachers who had dissonant beliefs and practices believed that the best approach for teaching was learner centered, but in practice, they were implementing a behaviorist approach, tapping low order thinking skills. I identified these teachers as the ones who needed mentoring the most because they weren't able to successfully translate their beliefs to practices, but they thought they were doing so. Someone had to give them feedback and mentor them on their practice. This figure shows that the factors that facilitated or hindered translation of beliefs to practices. The rich database techniques and strategies, strong conviction about beliefs, but most teachers had behaviorist beliefs, debunk myth rigor or the belief that the more topics covered, the better, and view of teaching as a mission or passion because the teachers would find ways for students to learn. The factors that hindered were limited knowledge of classroom management and teaching strategies, limited construction of articulated beliefs, particularly discovery learning, performance based assessment, learner centered teaching, and weak school administration support, especially in teacher training and mentoring and provision of materials and equipment, and the view of teaching as just an occupation because there was no further drive to improve practice anymore. No, they just go to work, to school, to work, and then go home without reflecting and doing more than what is the minimum. This part of my dissertation was de-emphasized because my panel members commented that I appeared like I was already evaluating the K to 12 curriculum, and somehow I agree. However, I was still able to get important points here that contributed to my final framework, especially the suggested teacher empowerment. No, so this is another long discussion, but I will go to my final work now. The teacher's beliefs about the learners, as what I've mentioned earlier, can either be biased or bias free. The biased beliefs tend to be fixed because the belief of the teacher is that the ability, behavior, and motivation of the students are seen as innate. The neutral belief about the learners, focusing on the diversity and individual differences, offers growth on the learners because the teachers make responsibility in the learning experience of the students. The beliefs about classroom teaching tend to correspond with the teacher's beliefs about the learners. The teachers with biased expectations tend to believe in and practice behaviorist approach, tapping lower order thinking skills, while the teachers without bias tend to believe in and practice constructivist teaching approach. It should be noted that teacher beliefs and practices affect one another. While many studies focus on the effect of teachers' beliefs on their practice, this study supports that the teacher's practices also influences the teacher's beliefs. When asked about their beliefs, the teachers referred to their experiences. The tendency to believe more on behaviorist approaches to teaching, assessment, and classroom management is brought about by richer experiences in that approach. Parental involvement, peer support, and teachers' personal guidance are deemed important supplemental approaches in classroom teaching because of the teacher's effective experiences in the utilization of those approaches. The successful translation of beliefs to practice is brought about by rich pedagogical knowledge since the teachers have many options of classroom techniques and strategies to choose from. The rich general pedagogical knowledge also strengthens their beliefs. Passion also plays a role in consonances between teachers' beliefs and practices because they try their best to implement what they believe in. Those who view teaching more than just their occupation may tend to pour more effort in order to practice what they believe is best for their students. School administrative support may not be the priority need of the ones who believe that they do not have to necessarily follow the dictates of the curricular reform, but the need for provision of materials and equipment, more so the provision of more training and mentoring by the school administration, especially for the implementation of the K to 12 is warranted. With a system of teacher training and mentoring in place, misconceptions that cause dissonances among the teachers can be addressed. Principles of discovery learning, performance-based assessment, learner-centered approach, meaningful learning, teaching by facilitating, and collaborative learning may be completely understood, appreciated, and implemented. The participation of the teachers in the improvement of the K to 12 curriculum is necessary because the teachers are the ones who see the realities in the classroom. Such participation is part of the teacher empowerment construct defined as investing teachers with the right to participate in the determination of school goals and policies and to exercise professional judgment about what and how to teach. Closed discussion about issues regarding the curriculum and policies may address concerns of teachers, especially the ones that they think gravely affect student learning. One of the offshoots of my dissertation is my creation of a Facebook group named Action Research for Teachers. Originally for teachers, one group imitated the name, so I changed it to Action Research for Educators, which now has almost 57,000 members. In my desire to come up with a mentoring model, actually I've been doing this since 2017. I've tried invited teachers and schools to participate in my mentoring sessions for free through the FB group. No, so the pandemic gave me an opportunity, no, to be able to reach more teachers. No, the group began to rise. No, the number of the group began to rise when the pandemic started. I've been able to create mentoring groups. I met them through Zoom and discuss with them ways to solve their teaching concerns. No? So my purpose was to mentor them primarily in their teaching concerns, but I would use action research for them to be interested in the mentoring program that I'm offering. No? So I'm really creating a model, and so far I've been failing, and because many of the teachers would not sustain their participation or would fail to submit the next part of the action research. But I've started partnering with some schools to help them in their teachers action research, no. So I think several I there's one main school in Muntinlupa that has been interested and been working with me, and I've been helping their teachers, but at the same time there are some teachers who would join the groups, and but I'm still in the process of really coming up with the best model. No, I've had several already, and the first one I did was actually a failure. This one is the second one. The third one is my being my I was supposed to connect the teachers with my students in EDRE 101, no, action research. But I think it would be difficult during this time, no. So, yun yung third na phase na gagawin ko. My framework, no, just to end my talk, my sharing, my framework helped me target the needs of the teachers when I do teacher training. But as I discovered in this research, the teachers need mentoring. And as an external expert, the best that I can do is to mentor, no, primarily mentor them, but through action research. Thank you so much and have a good night. You can ask questions.